gentlemen, welcome to the keynote session. Please welcome Vice Chair of the ASM Microbe 2017 Program Committee, Dr. David Relman.
Good evening. I hope that you are enjoying ASM Microbe so far. We are looking forward to a great session with Kate Rubins and Ed Yong this evening. Tonight's session is sponsored by ASM Journals in honor of the 50th anniversary of the Journal of Virology, celebrating 50, yes, why not? Celebrating 50 years of research in virology, ASM's Journal of Virology receives over 45,000 citations a year and features cross-disciplinary research in the study of viruses of animals, archaea, bacteria, fungi, plants, and protozoa. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's session, which will be a conversation between Ed Yong and Dr. Kate Rubins. Ed has asked me to keep this introduction very brief, and so I will oblige him. Ed Yong is a science journalist who reports for The Atlantic and is based in Washington, D.C. Ed's work appears several times every week on The Atlantic's website and has also been featured in National Geographic, New Yorker, Wired, Nature, New Scientist, Scientific American, and many more. I Contain Multitudes, his first book, looks at the remarkable partnerships between animals and microbes. And I should add that this book is being converted into a series of videos that will be coming out this fall. Kate Rubins is a NASA astronaut and became the 60th woman to fly in space when she launched on a Soyuz spacecraft last July 6th and served as a flight engineer for Expedition 4849 at the International Space Station. I should add, she is also a member of ASM. Yeah. By way of brief background, Kate received her bachelor's degree from the University of California in San Diego in 1999, and then matriculated at Stanford in the Biosciences PhD program, where I had the honor of serving as a thesis co-advisor along with Pat Brown in the Department of Biochemistry. Her PhD focused on the mechanisms that underlie fulminant viral disease, and in particular, smallpox and Ebola. After receiving her PhD in 2006, Kate became a Whitehead Fellow at MIT and organized an independent research program examining monkeypox host interactions. 2 years later, when NASA issued a call for applications for the astronaut program, Kate followed a childhood dream of traveling into space, applied, and was then accepted in July 2009 as one of 14 astronauts in astronaut group 20. During her mission to the International Space Station last year, Kate spent 115 days in space and conducted 2 spacewalks, becoming only the 12th woman to ever walk in space, not counting Sandra Bullock. In addition, she performed or participated in more than 275 different scientific experiments in the fields of molecular and cellular biology, microbiology, human physiology, fluid and combustion physics, Earth and space science, and technology development. Of note, she was the first person to sequence DNA in space, an accomplishment that you will hear has relevance and implications for long-term human space travel. As a mentor, of course, you hope that your students will go far. But more important, you hope that they will find fulfillment in science. Kate has done both in spades. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Please welcome Dr. Kate Rubins and Ed Yong. David. How are you doing?
Well, thanks everyone for coming. Before we start, can I just check, has anyone else here been into space? Show hands. No hands. Okay, right. So given that, I think it would be good to start with actually getting a feel for what the experience of being in space is like. And Kate has a video.
I do, yes. So I can introduce you a little bit to Expedition 48 and 49 and kind of give you a bit of a flavor of what we did, what you do between launch and landing when you're on board the space station and some of the scientific work we did. So if you guys are ready, we can play the video and I'll kind of talk you through it.
Yeah, let's do it.
So Expedition 48, I was a member of that. We launched in July from Kazakhstan, and we actually start training for this a couple years ahead of time. The morning of launch is when it really all comes to a head. So we actually, we get in our suits, we lace them up, we pressure check them because this is our protection against depressurization in a capsule. This is several hours before the rocket launch. We walk out, we actually report to a Russian commission. This is where we truly get certified to fly into space right at this moment.
How heavy is the suit?
It's pretty heavy. You're actually wearing a lot of protection at this point. It's got to be airtight. So a few hours later, this is one of the longest waits of your life. you finally get the countdown and the rocket takes off. It's really an incredible ride. One of the most amazing things though is when you're docking to the space station and you actually open the hatch and you see the inside of the space station for the first time. This is something that we've simmed for and we've trained in on the ground, but there's nothing like the actual International Space Station that you're then floating into and becoming a part of this international crew. We're seeing our crewmates for the first time here. We haven't seen these guys in 3 months. And we're learning how to float and doing it on camera for the first time, which is terrible.
At what point in the process does the feeling of weightlessness kick in? Is it kind of gradual?
Almost immediately. As soon as you hit that main engine cutoff, you're floating and you're immediately aware of it. So one of the things that we did actually within 72 hours, we're still getting adjusted to weightlessness here, was having an arriving spacecraft. And so this was the Dragon SpaceX vehicle. We're both going 17,500 miles an hour, and this vehicle's coming up to the space station, and we actually have to grapple it with the robotic arm. We were pretty happy to see this all go well because it brought the international docking adapter with it. So this is this huge piece of equipment here. It's about the size of this dais that we're standing on. And we needed to go do an EVA to install it. We had to go do a spacewalk. So this is really good news for any astronaut when they say, hey, this is time to go do a spacewalk, you're going out the door. The actual process of getting ready for the spacewalk takes it's about 12 hours total that you're in this suit. Yeah, so we do a pre-breathe so that we don't suffer from decompression sickness. You go through hours of this breathe, you make sure your tools are correct. And then you finally get to the point where you're depressing the hatch and you actually float outside of the space station for the first time. And this is, it's kind of an incredible moment because at this point there's nothing beneath you. It's just 250 miles down and then there's the planet. And this is the first time that you're ever seeing this, right? So I'm thinking, don't freeze, Kate, don't screw this up. It's a pretty tough moment. It's hard to do even small things. We train a lot for this in the giant pool, but when you're actually outside, there's this realization that every piece of hardware that you touch costs more money than you're ever going to make in your lifetime, and you need to do it absolutely perfectly. But we installed this docking adapter kind of floating on the very front of the space station, floating over the Earth, and came back inside. It felt incredibly good, and almost safer to be back inside the space station. Mission Control called up and they said, hey, you guys did a great job. Good news, you're going out the door in another few days. You're going to go do another spacewalk. So the second one was to bring this giant radiator back in. And we also installed a couple of high definition cameras on the outside of space station so that we can actually beam down. We can use this for scientific purposes, and we can actually beam down high resolution photos of the Earth. And so for this spacewalk, we were way out on the robotic arm and at one end of the truss. I was out there by myself for a long time, just kind of hanging out near the solar arrays. So again, it felt really good to be back and with my crew.
How do you decide who gets to do the spacewalk?
So the mission control team, the mission control team decides this. There's a lot of planning and factors they put into this and who's trained for what endeavor. We do, one of the other things we do is a lot of Earth observation. So we've got this, we're showing you this cupola here, and this is kind of our view of the crew can all three fit in it, or we can, one person can kind of fit in and curl up, and you can actually fly over the planet in some of these pictures. So there's the coast of California. You can see the Central Valley and the fog climbing in. We can take an amazing amount of Earth observation photographs. So we use this for science. We'll get geological targets, and it turns into this sport almost on board. You know, you're like, I got that glacier, and you have to actually learn how to track your target and take these really high resolution photographs. But we'll get science targets, we'll get education targets from kids everywhere. And it's also just, I mean, to watch the weather patterns on the planet, to watch, you'll pass over the same spot, over and over again, but your orbit precesses, and you can see this whole view of the Earth at some point or another during your mission. It gets really addictive to kind of be there with the camera and looking at our planet. So we spend a lot of time doing that.
And you're a microbiologist by training, but
Yes.
All of this work seems to involve a lot of different fields, the sort of climate science, geology that you're doing as well.
Absolutely, you're a jack of all trades. You end up being a plumber, an electrician, and a dentist as well. So this is me in my natural habitat with a microscope here, but we do a lot of experiments. So we were doing some cell culture, long duration cell culture for the first time on board. That's what the microscopy was for. We also we brought up a small sequencer, and so this is like every Earth-based experiment, but things are floating all the time. And so we were really looking at, does this technology work? Could we use this for long duration when we're apart from our planet, for example, when we go to Mars? And we also wanted to know, could we use this technology on board ISS to look at microbes, to look at biomarkers and that sort of thing. So these were some incredibly exciting experiments. I was pretty thrilled to watch the first sequences come in. We had a lot invested in this project. We didn't know if it was going to work. We'd sent a lot of samples on board. The next thing we were trying was actually sample prep. What can we do with pipetting? How does that resemble? So some of this work was just, can we do this? Is this like bench pipetting? But of course it's space, so they 3D printed a centrifuge rotor, and
wow,
this was, I have to say, it was one of the more, not that often you get to spin your samples down like that, but they do pellet well. Another one of my questions, that this was just one of my projects that I brought up in my free time, was can you pipette on board? So for a 384 well plate, I think, you're going to say that's going to work really well. But if you see, for example, like the 50 mil conical there, that's just my reservoir of pipetting fluid, and it will hold the fluid inside the conical. And so we actually demonstrated in a variety of 15 mil tubes, 50 mil tubes, 96 well plates. How does this all work, and can we actually use more commercial type equipment that you'd find on your bench top? Can you use this in microgravity? And I really didn't know. I mean, I'm messing around with food coloring and water here, but this was truly the experiment to say, what can we do? Where do we break it? Where do we need to design specialized hardware to handle any kind of micro or molecular biology?
Wait, so was this the first time people had pipetted in space?
I'm sure they have actually pipetted, but we haven't just brought up commercial hardware where you're just doing stuff like you would on a bench. And so that was actually that video was the first time that we really did that. And it's, we've got a lot of, so this is my crewmate Tak. He's assembling a payload here that's actually going to go out in the airlock. So we can actually expose things to the vacuum of space as well. So this is the Japanese airlock, and it'll actually depressurize, and then you can grab the payload on the outside by the robotic arm and put it on an external platform and actually expose it to the volume of space, and you can launch things from the space station as well. So we're launching, it's a great day when you get to launch nanosatellites from the space station. I mean, it's amazing. You do watch them kind of fall away from the space station, and there's this really interesting depth perception thing that happens. We have a lot of combustion experiments that we do as well. So this is one of our combustion modules. We can actually look at droplet combustion and aerosolization and how things are going to be different in microgravity. We have a lot of work that's looking at satellites and how satellites move. So we've got this is, me being the kind of the motion vector here, but we've got a lot of these small satellites that are actually self-propelled, and we can look at how they would dock and interact, but we can do that entire experiment inside the space station. So we're all in free fall, but we're looking at the behavior of these satellites in free fall.
When you were doing those experiments, like, how do you keep your equipment from floating away? Like,
Velcro and duct tape on everything. Yeah, it's amazing how mindful you have to be about every piece of equipment that you touch. You can never just put something down and forget about it. If you do, it's going to float away and you're going to lose it. So you have to kind of take everything and very specifically put it in a location. It adds a lot of mental workload to
do you
your
practice
science.
that on the ground before?
Not really. There's not a. You kind of get this learning how to juggle multiple things when you're on board, and you get this sense of it. So this is our new crew coming up, and a new vehicle. This was a much larger vehicle, actually. So this is talking about managing stuff. This was 5,000 pounds of stuff. So we're really excited to see this Cygnus vehicle get there, but at the same time, there's a ton of stuff management that happens on board. So you get all these supplies and logistics, and you actually have to manage them. And one of my crewmates' rule was, if you have 3 things in your hand in space, you're going to lose one of them. And it's really accurate. You just have to deal with everything, and you actually have to deal with yourself and where you're going to put yourself the whole time too. So this is just a little bit about our undocking here. So we were there for 115 days. At some point, ground said, you have to come home. I argued. They said, do it anyway, get in the vehicle. My crewmates were like, we're going home today. So we undock, and we orbit the planet just as a small spacecraft for a few orbits. And then we actually fire the engine, and we start burning, and we deorbit through the atmosphere. So this is the point where you actually become part of the giant meteor fireball, which people talk about launch a lot. They don't talk about re-entry. You're going from 17,500 miles an hour to 0 in 33 minutes. You can think about what the energy is that you convert that to heat energy. So you kind of come screaming through the atmosphere as a fireball. You have this massive shock of parachute opening, and everything looks nice and calm here because they don't have any video for the crazy lit on fire and a barrel going over Niagara Falls part of it. And then
so obviously it's insulated, but does it get hot inside the?
They have a cooling system,
right,
so
okay.
it's survivable. It's not comfortable. And then you impact the planet. So this is our Earth accident, not our car accident. You
In
hit pretty
Kazakhstan.
hard in Kazakhstan. And the SAR forces come get you, and they pull you out of the capsule, and this is pretty much a pure joy moment. You're alive, you've survived this, you're feeling the atmosphere for the first time, you're feeling wind.
Do you get gravity sick? Is that a thing?
You are not happy about gravity, but you're pretty happy about being back on Earth. There's something about, I'm back on the planet again. That's an interesting, it's a fascinating sensation.
All right, well, I think that... One of my questions here was actually, how do you centrifuge in space? So now we know.
With a drill, occasionally.
I kind of think everyone here wants a drill centrifuge now for their normal.
Your students are all going to be building this.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, so you have a background in virology. You did work in smallpox and HIV and Ebola. So how do you go from there to being an astronaut?
Yes. So it actually started with a USA Jobs application online that my very good friend and longtime collaborator, Lisa Hensley, she works at NIH now, saw and called me. We were writing a grant together, and she's like, this is funny. They have astronaut applications online. Like, isn't that, what a weird thing that you would have a job application for being an astronaut. I said, well, I did want to do that when I was a little kid, and I was writing a grant, and so it was a bit of a procrastination technique. I'm like, put my astronaut application in and then go back to this grant. And that's how life happens sometimes.
That's amazing. When I procrastinate, I don't get sent into space. Okay, so and then talk to us about the training. Like, how does one prepare for all the weirdness of doing science in space?
Yeah, so there's actually there's a lot of thought that goes into the training. A lot of it's based on military aviation training and training for folks in high performance environments. So a lot of it is simulation. You can't. We don't have a microgravity room at NASA. People ask that all the time, but we have a giant pool that we have a space station mock-up, and you can go in a spacesuit and train for that. It's all a simulation. Part of it is things like survival training. So you go over to Moscow, they throw you out in the woods for 3 days, they say, we'll come back and get you in the middle of winter in 72 hours, and you work with your crew, and they hand you, a machete and a canteen, and good luck with the rest of it. So some of it is just, okay, this seems horrible at the outset, and it's not so bad after and it's nice, it's kind of nice bonding with your crew members at that point. We do a lot of flight training. So we actually get in the T-38 supersonic fighter jet trainers. We learn how to fly those. I hadn't done any flying before I came to NASA, and they said, well, we can take you. We're gonna turn you into a fairly decent pilot. And this is good high pressure training. It puts you in a difficult situation. So a lot of it is just being in a lot of different situations, going into these environments, and kind of relying on your preparedness and your training.
And did any of your previous work prepare you for it? Because obviously with you're handling things like Ebola and smallpox, you need to be very precise and careful. You've presumably been in BSL-4 suits.
Yeah, I think some of that was helpful in terms of being very careful about the situation you're in and understanding the margin of safety is really slim. So when you're doing an Ebola experiment, it's high threat. You're not going to move that pipette around and be incautious about it, and you're going to think very carefully about everything you're doing. That's pretty similar to a spacewalk. You're out there and you are very aware that you're at extreme risk every minute. So I think working in a remote environment, working in Congo, working in the biosafety level 4 labs does help you develop this sense of this is on the edge, and I'm really hanging it out here, and I better be careful about what I'm doing next.
Do you remember exactly where you were when you were told that you were going to be an astronaut? Yeah,
I was in my office at Whitehead, and my next thought, I was like, this is fantastic. And then I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do with my lab? So that was sort of the next big process. And we actually had some great collaborators. So Pardeep Sabeti at Broad absorbed some of my folks, and we sent some to BU and kept everybody continuing their research without the PI, which is kind of a strange thing. PIs usually move institutions or they die, but they don't pick up the stakes and go to the astronaut office. So the contracting officers were a little unsure about what to do in this situation.
That's right. It's a pretty extreme way of
Yes.
getting away from your lab.
Yeah, and my lab folks were great. They took it in stride and continued the research, and it's actually been really fun to see where they've gone and what they've done.
And so the video hinted at this a little bit, but I wanted to get into what is different and strange about doing science on a space station. So it's just bench science, but it's obviously in such a weird environment. What's strange and unusual about it that people wouldn't even think about?
Yeah, well, you can pipette upside down hanging from the ceiling for the first part. But it is one of the reasons that we're doing a lot of this work on board is because it's this interesting microgravity environment. And so I think the place that you really see that is in how fluids behave. I don't know if you've ever seen the video of Chris Hadfield wringing out a washcloth and the water creeps up his hands. That's like a horror movie, honestly, to me. It's very creepy, and the way fluids behave, if you don't have gravity as the variable, they'll behave in these completely different, unexpected ways. So surface tension really takes over. It means it does some really interesting things to human physiology. So for example, you don't have that 1G vector moving the blood into your legs all the time. You're floating. All that fluid shifts upwards. We're actually in this really high CO2 environment. We are in a completely closed loop system. So we actually don't launch water off the planet. We recycle our water on board. So we take all the waste, we take the condensate, we purify that. That's our drinking water again. We scrub CO2 out of the atmosphere. We generate oxygen by splitting water. So you are in this very strange, you're doing the experiment, but you're inside the machine as well. And just the mechanics of handling everything when you and the experiment and the vehicle are all in free fall. It's the variable that we're investigating, but it does make the bench research a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, and are there any kinds of experiments that are just like ruled out, like things that we would take up for granted here that are impossible to do in space for whatever reason?
Yeah, there's a lot of it seems to be logistic, and we actually had a lot of these issues in Congo. So if you think about a remote environment, you're going to be power limited. So we generate all of our power on the space station from these giant solar arrays. But that is our only source of power. And so we actually, for a number of years, just had this power coming in as it would come in and it would get stepped down, and you had direct current only. And so you can't just take a machine that you'd plug into your bench and plug it into the space station. You have to specially modify that. We've actually changed that now so we can have commercial hardware. But anything where you're thinking about mass or volume of a payload, it has to be incredibly detail certified that it can fly in the space environment, because you can't bring something up that's going to light on fire. Fire in space is one of our biggest terrors. You cannot, you really have to manage this. You cannot evacuate, essentially. So we have to control the kinds of equipment that's going up there. You're very limited in terms of what you can launch off the planet. And then you got to think about power and data and fluidics considerations and consumables. So anything where you would think about, hey, what could I take to Antarctica? How would this be transportable on a field mission? You probably have those same design considerations on orbit.
And volume, presumably, is a consideration too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is why, like, doing a sequencing experiment in space until very recently would have been completely impossible.
The sequencers that we have, the big benchtop ones, are just too big. And I think we've wanted to do it for a long time, but it hasn't been possible until we've had these sort of field portable devices that you can actually, you can bring with you. They're small, they don't draw a lot of power, they're pretty robust. And this is something that, initially we kind of thought, well, why is this just, we're gonna do sequencing in space because we can. But if you really think about, we're gonna move humans further and further away from the planet. We're not gonna be able to send samples back to the planet. Right now we send all of our clinical microbiology comes back down on plates, lands in Kazakhstan, gets transported back to the lab at JSC. If we're going to Mars, we're not going to be sending samples back. So we need kind of an in situ real-time analysis capability. And we wanted also a platform that's not going to just let you do microbial population analysis, but biomarkers and when we go to Mars, we certainly are not going to be using this generation of sequencers, but we're starting to figure out how this equipment works so that as the technology evolves, we can be taking this into our exploration world as well.
Sure, because so my understanding is that like if you get sick in space, your options are pretty limited, right?
Yes.
And there's been a history of astronauts getting quite badly sick in.
Well, so we can treat on board. We've got limited capability. So, for example, if you've got trauma, we've got AED and those sorts of things. We have kind of a limited pharmacy, and we're trained a little bit to be paramedics among the crew. We can be first responders. Right now, our resource, if you have a really bad medical emergency, is to undock that Soyuz and to come home. We're still quite some time from definitive care. But if we're talking about an exploration mission, we're not going to be talking about that ability to come home. So you do want to diagnose right there. You want to have that autonomous medical capability. And ideally, we'd like to be able to treat conditions because we're not going to be able to send people back to the planet for any kind of medical emergency.
Or bring fresh medicines up.
Exactly.
Right, okay. And so what happens to the microbes that you take with you into space? Like
that is a great question. This is, we've got 200 more experiments that we want to do. This is like number one, is what happens to the human microbiome in space. I'm not sure that we've really characterized very much the environmental microbiome of the space station. And it's a fascinating little environmental niche. It's been separate from the planet for 16 years. It's a semi-closed loop system. So we occasionally bring these large, microbe producers in every 3 months when we launch new humans up there. The question is, how stable is that environmental microbiome? What's going on in our water loops? I'm not sure sometimes the engineers love it when we ask these questions, but this is kind of this fascinating opportunity. What's happening to our microbiome? What's happening to the space station microbiome?
Has any work been done on that?
So yeah, some limited sampling work has been done. So those results haven't been published yet, but they have done a few time points here and there to start looking at it. You know, I want to fly 1,000 swabs and characterize the entire space station microbiome, but you know, we have to balance this with everything else that we're doing at NASA. So.
Right, yeah. And I know that there's been some work done on the microbiome in space and how like how commensal bacteria react to things like microgravity.
Yeah, there have been some gene expression studies. I think we need to do more of those. I think you know, we want to have a better understanding of microgravity as a stressor, you know, and it's an interesting environment to put microbes in, how they might sense microgravity, how they might react to microgravity. You know, there's been some publications on potential increased virulence in microgravity. So the question is, you know, does it change gene expression? You know, how do microbes adapt to the microgravity environment? Are they going to change their regulation? Is our low Earth radiation environment doing anything? If we're starting to think, you know, NASA might be thinking, I would bet, about synthetic biology for an exploration mission, we're talking mid-2030s, you very well might have microbes breaking down your waste or sequestering carbon or being a nutrient source. We need to understand how engineered microbes are going to behave, and are they going to behave in the same way in a microgravity environment that they would on Earth if this is our, for example, if this is our waste management system.
It feels like the number of potential questions that you could ask is so vastly outweighs the amount of time you would actually have on the station, the number of like shots you would get to even do science at all in space. How do you prioritize that?
It's huge. You guys are all going to be up until 2 in the morning designing experiments that could fly on the space station. But send them in to NASA, please. Yeah, it is. It's this really interesting variable to play with. I think it's actually a little bit complicated by the fact that we only have one laboratory, I would say on Earth, but it's not on Earth, that we only have one place that we can do these experiments, and we're a bit time limited. So we are not going to have the space station forever. We actually have, and right now we're committed through 2024 to do these experiments, but we have a definite time horizon where these things can get done. And so NASA will look at what is the prioritization for their exploration goals. What questions do we need to answer about human physiology? And then we also have part of the space station is actually a national laboratory. And so their questions are prioritized. You know, where can we get Earth benefit to this? Is this a question of basic science that we might understand a fundamental mechanism here? And we'll prioritize these experiments and we'll try to send up as much as we can. Now some of the questions are about efficiency. How can we get the most number of samples? If we have a limited time on this lab, how can we collect samples in a really high throughput manner that we can actually be analyzing for years to come or decades to come?
Are there any interesting like biosafety issues about doing work on space?
Absolutely, yes. It's biosafety, chemical safety. So we're really not doing anything more than biosafety level 2 in this closed environment. We actually have a lot of chemical safety concerns that you know, they're worried that things can float. You can have exposures in a different way to the humans on board than you would in an Earth-based laboratory. So we actually think a lot more about containment. It's a little bit more like working in a BSL-3 or BSL-4. We really think about containing because you are living in your laboratory. You know, and some of your students may do this, right? You know, or you'd like them to anyway. Your postdocs will be a little more productive. But you're in the space station. You're not. You never get an air change out, right? You can filter, but those same air molecules are the ones that we launched with. And so you do think about safety and containment. And I would say we apply a much more stringent bar to any experiments that are going up.
And talk us through like your working day. What is that like?
Yeah. So it's we actually, you know, we have to first figure out, hey, what's the time of day? Because you have 16 sunrises and sunsets. So how do you even know what time it is? You're going around the planet all the time. So we actually, to keep humans and our circadian rhythms all in order, we have operationally picked GMT. So we operate on GMT. It's also a nice balance between US and Russian control centers. And so we kind of artificially start our day no matter where we are on our planet. It's about a 12-hour workday. We do about 8 hours of a combination of various science experiments. So I did, there were 275 experiments on my mission, different groups. I was hands-on with about 100 of them. So it's getting everything, materials science, combustion, fluidics, molecular biology. We're getting that done. And then we're also maintaining the spaceship. So you have to fix things when they're broken. This fancy toilet and water reclamation system is broken all the time. That gets immediate attention when it breaks. We stop whatever we're doing and fix that. And things like preparing for a spacewalk or preparing for a visiting vehicle to come up. So that's the most of your day is fixing stuff that's broken, doing some experiments, and then the side duties as required.
And with the same very small group of people,
Yep.
day in, day out.
Yes.
Did you know them before you went up? Did you have spend time with them to make sure that you weren't all going to kill
We're
each
not
other?
going to kill each other after a few months. Yeah, they actually do a really nice job. We train together. We work as a crew starting about 2.5 years out. So I was up there the whole time with a Japanese astronaut and a Russian cosmonaut, and we'd trained together. We started with water survival and winter survival at the very beginning. And so that's a really nice way to say, hey, you are all in this together. We do a lot of simulations. So we do hours and hours of launch and landing simulations together. And we're training in centers all over the world. So we actually travel to Russia, to Tokyo, to Cologne, Germany, to Montreal. And so we're training everywhere. And we really end up, I would say, after even the first 6 months to a year, we're working as a cohesive unit. We're really working as a crew. We actually will, you kind of understand how the other person thinks. We would switch between Russian and English all the time and sort of do this, hey, I'm going to finish your thought. And it drives the instructors crazy, right? Because we've been working together for so long, we actually really understand how each other works. So by the time you launch, you've got this really good sense of your crewmates and how everybody's going to work together.
And are you going back?
Back to space.
Mm-hmm.
I hope so. I'm an active astronaut, so you kind of wait for a mission assignment, and at this point, my boss is in charge of that. If I'm going to get assigned another mission, I'm qualified, and I would jump at the chance to go. It was probably the most amazing experience I have ever had, and I think there's a constant drive. To recapture that. Every astronaut, I think, wants to get back. You're crazy enough that you want to get back on this rocket again and go launch yourself.
And what is it about it that's so incredible? I mean, we can sort of guess, but I'm curious as to whether there are things that you don't expect on the ground that just defy your expectations.
Yeah, I think the view of the Earth for me was one of the most amazing, unexpected parts of the journey, and I thought. I kind of had a handle on what Earth looked like, and I actually wasn't that impressed before I launched. I was like, yeah, going around the planet, this is going to get a little old maybe after a month or two, and I don't know what I'm going to do for entertainment. And it was really nice to be absolutely and utterly wrong on that point. That I saw the planet for the first time, and I couldn't speak. I mean, I just dropped dead. Like my brain just can't even process how amazing this is. It is much brighter when you actually see it than any kind of film or camera image will give you. And you get this sense when you're actually separate from the planet, you really see the planet as part of the solar system. And there's this understanding that you see this, people talk about this fragile Earth. You really see that. The atmosphere layer is a tiny, thin shell, and you kind of see this blue orb suspended in the sky. You can also see it in the context of our entire universe, and so you can look out the windows and you see stars. The only other place I've seen stars like that is the middle of Congo, where you've got no light pollution. You can really see the Milky Way on both sides of the window, and so. The first time I really got this sense that we're truly in a solar system was actually when the moon, you change your beta angle. So where the sun hits you, how you're going around the Earth, how the moon's going around the Earth. And most of the time it's all kind of normal. And then you'll get into this orbital phase where actually the moon's rising and setting a lot. And you can truly at that point see orbital motion. I was, for the very first time in my life, convinced that we were really orbiting the planet and that the moon is orbiting the planet. And I mean, not that I wasn't convinced of that, but it's a sense of seeing it and knowing it, that you can look at solar system or look at planetary motion all you want and you don't truly, truly know it. And so that was an amazing, I mean, the morning that we landed, you couldn't peel me away from the window. I was, getting ready. I was all dressed. I was ready to go, and I just was still in the cupola because you just still want to see this Earth. And I was pretty excited to be going back to it, but that view when you're just a little bit separate from it is amazing.
I feel this is a slightly loaded question, but go on. So you get this view of the entire planet. We are now at a time of increasing isolationism. Does that change your view of humanity when you get back onto the ground?
I think it's more the thoughts that you have on orbit, and part of that's influenced by the international aspect of our crew and the fact that we're very comfortable just working in different countries, and the space agencies collaborate with each other. This is one of these intangible benefits of space exploration. You're putting people from very different cultures in a highly stressful environment. They're utterly dependent on each other for life. This is going to create a connection, right? And we bring this back to our agency. And I actually had the sense when I was on board of a bit more connectedness, because I was flying over places. I may never go to the Himalayas in my life, but there's things that you fly over every day and you get to know it, like you're driving down your own street. And you see it through this camera lens. And so I think I felt much more that we're a global society and we all belong to this one planet. And I felt that very strongly. And it was very interesting just talking to my crewmates, the Russian guys, the Japanese astronaut, that we all had this sense that we're much more united by being space flyers and space explorers than we are with whatever the political situation happens to be on the ground.
That's wonderful. And when we were saying in the green room backstage that one of the perks of doing this is that you get to help select future astronauts too. This
So my big criteria is, do I want to spend 6 months in a tin can with this person? This is probably good to think about when you take somebody into your lab as well, or if you're joining a lab.
That's right. So if any of you want to be an astronaut, buy Kate a drink later. I think that is a good time to wrap up my end of the questioning, but we have time for questions from all of you, and I really wanted to thank Kate for taking the time. It's been a complete honor. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm happy to take any questions, and I think we've got mics here if folks want to come up to the microphone and ask about research or living in space, big or small.
Don't be shy. Okay, gentleman over there.
I'll try not to be too starstruck here, pun intended. But I'm Kevin Bogagy from University of Washington and more recently Tulane. And I was curious, I know a few years ago, Dr. David Newman out of MIT was working on the biosuit and looking at how we can come up with ways that you guys aren't wasting so much of your energy overcoming this giant balloon, and where you actually have a mechanical pressure instead. And that, hypothetically at least, that would also be less dangerous if you had a puncture, for example. Do you know if that's gone anywhere? I haven't read anything in a few years on that, but that seems kind of like and they also look really cool, so.
Yeah, it does, right? And we would love anything that's not this bulky 300-pound suit that we have to haul around all over the place. Yeah, we're working on a lot of different concepts for exploration suits. It's the process of suit development is incredibly long. It's actually like certifying a spacecraft, right? You're in your own spacecraft, so you have to certify the thermal system, any movement system, the micrometeoroid control. And so it's a long development process. So we're looking at things like exploration suits, where you're going to be going to lunar orbit, or you're going to Mars. And so we're looking at a lot of those things. I think folks would really, it is so hard to work in the spacesuit. It will take you 10 times longer to do a smaller task than you could if you weren't so encumbered. One of the best analogies I've heard is doing brain surgery with oven mitts on roller skates. And I think it's, very simple
Upside
things.
down.
You get very, very frustrated with. And so anything where you've got more dexterity and the ability to move around is really a positive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another question?
Hi, my name is Joy, and I'm from McGill University. And my question is, what kind of personality or characteristics you will look for in a candidate to accompany you in the space?
That is a great question. And you actually, we actually tend to just not want extremes, right? I mean, you don't want somebody who is so extroverted that I'm a little extroverted, but you don't want somebody who's like so on all the time, but you don't want somebody who's so shy that you can't draw them out. You want somebody who's a good companion, who's a good crew member, and who's operationally competent. You can put your trust in them that if the space station is, I wake up at 2 in the morning and there's a fire and it's burning down the module, that they're going to grab an oxygen mask and they're going to drag me to safety. So we're looking for that kind of reliability, and somebody that you would probably genuinely really want to interact with for a long time. You find that in stressful circumstances, people's their big things get magnified, and at the same time, who they really are comes out. So you can find this out pretty quickly. If you're auditioning for lab folks or somebody, send them to water survival training. That brings out who they are very, very rapidly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Sarita Fry, University of New Hampshire. Can you tell us what DNA you sequenced and what the results were?
Yeah, so absolutely. So we were thinking about this for a long time, and the folks that were on the project said, hey, can we put our genomes in this mix? I said, we don't have to do IRB consent, so let's not do humans right away, but we want mammalians. So we did a mix of mouse, E. coli, and lambda, which actually gave us a nice GC spread. It was a complex mixture so that we could actually say, hey, can we pick out different sequences and can we map those? And we reassembled the E. coli genome de novo. So there were kind of a lot of fun things that you have to pick this 4 years before you launch it, and then that's the one mixture that you're stuck with. We're doing some things right now where we actually are doing all the preps on board the space station, so we can sequence from clinical samples.
Hi.
Hello. One question is from your perspective, how do you think your research there in space contribute to the immediate problems that people here in Earth is facing?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you do kind of wonder, does this have any benefit back to the planet, right? Or we're doing this space exploration and that's exciting, but how does that actually helping all the people that live on the planet? And if you look at most of the mechanisms, the fundamental mechanisms that we're looking at, there's usually a disease parallel, actually. So I think part of it is a basic research argument. Why do we do basic research? Sometimes you don't know what the outcome is going to be. We know that microgravity is an interesting variable, and it's not something that we can study otherwise. So when you start to probe on a system, a cellular system, a physiological system, we've got a new variable here. We've got gravity as a rheostat. We can't do that in any of our Earth experiments. But we also have some fairly applied ends of the research. So for example, bone loss. We've got an osteoporosis model, essentially, for bone loss. We've got this really rapid bone loss where we're interested in preventing this bone loss, but then also looking at what happens when you rebuild it. We've got muscle wasting. We've got, I'll tell you from firsthand experience, some serious neurovestibular disturbances when you get on board. You do not feel well. You're really neurovestibularly compromised, both when you launch and when you land. We've got some really interesting physiology in terms of the fluid shift. We've got cardiac changes, immune changes. And so I think there's a lot of application to, I'm really focusing on the human health part of it. We're also looking at how do you keep people alive? And so we're studying the environmental systems of keeping people alive in this closed loop system for 16 years. I think we're learning a lot from an engineering perspective about things like CO2 scrubbing, our water filtration system. And so there's real parallels there. For life on the planet.
Hi, Byron from the University of Michigan. I'm curious, I think a lot of us chose research careers because we love our flexibility, both intellectually and with our time. I'm curious how different that was becoming an astronaut, where probably everything is scheduled out for you and you have very little flexibility or none at all.
It is. It's absolutely, it's very scheduled, and you really are very, very operationally oriented. But at the same time, I was just fascinated by all of these experiments. So I would get everything done in the day, and then I'd go look on we have a task list, right, where you can actually go. It's a great way of getting more work out of astronauts. You give them a little bit of autonomy at the end of the day. And I was, I'd go look for 3 or 4 things to go do off that task list, because you're in this environment that is so strange and amazing. And I think as a researcher, you want to explore it. I wanted to explore every facet of, what happens to fire, what happens to fluid. And so there's this real strong drive to work every hour of the day to get extra things done. And so I think it wasn't necessarily research that I was directing as a PI, but it is so amazing in space that anything that was proposed, I wanted to jump in and do that experiment right away.
Hi, I'm absolutely amazed by everything that you've accomplished. I'm sure I'm not alone in that, when we're a kid, we've all had, little microscopes and stared at the stars and done all of these things. And honestly, I never would have dreamed that I'd even be this far in my life. But looking at what you've done, was there a moment where it really hit you? I know that I've struggled myself with imposter syndrome, like, am I really where I'm supposed to be? How did you get past the fact that you're doing something that everyone only dreams of? Like, we're a room full of dreamers, and you've done something that I can't even wrap my mind around. So do you have any advice, and how did you feel about yourself through all this?
Yeah, I think that actually a lot of the operational training is what ends up giving you confidence. And you feel that. I think you always feel that in science. You wonder, is your science the best? Can you compete? Are you really at the top level? Are you going to get this grant? Are you going to get this paper? And I think coming to NASA, part of the operational training, that's what's drilled into you, is you have to deal with this situation. You're the only one that's going to be there and do that. And so I think some of that drilled into me. You have no idea if you're the best at this. You don't even know if you're semi-good at this. I have no clue how to fly an airplane, right? But they put you in the front seat of an airplane. You're going to have to solo it in 20 hours. And I think the message is that you got to leave this self-doubt behind. I think you can absolutely do it. You can handle anything that's thrown your way. I am not a particularly capable human being. I mean, let me just disabuse you of this notion right now. I'm fairly ordinary, and I've been lucky and stuck in some interesting situations. And if I put you in the front seat of a T-38, you would figure out how to fly it as well. So I think I'm confident in that.
I would. I really think I would. Thank you.
All right, let's go there. And I will say that we have only 5 more minutes for questions. So if you aren't already in the line, you probably won't get to ask.
Hello. I'm interested, actually 2 questions. One of them is you take...
Sorry, can we stick to 1 question each, because there's
question?
7 people.
Oh, it's okay, sorry.
Sorry.
1 question. I would like to, you take astronaut food to space, right? So you don't have to do dishes.
No.
So I'm interested in knowing, like, for the amount of water that you take to space, like, how do you recycle it? And because since you don't have to do dishes, right, all this water goes everywhere else. You recycle this water. You have a water treatment plant in space. The same water you use for drinking then goes where?
Yeah, so we actually have a whole water reclamation system. So it takes even the moisture in the air, all the condensate. It takes our waste. So it takes, your coffee today becomes your coffee tomorrow.
Right.
You just don't think about that too much when you're on board. It tastes fine. It's absolutely no problem to drink. So it's treated with sulfuric acid. It's then it's a reverse osmosis and scrubbed and purified. It's iodinated when it's in that loop, actually, and then the iodine is filtered out and it comes back to us in terms of drinking water. But we're very careful. We want every water molecule. So we're actually very careful to lose little water because we don't want to launch that water off the planet. Great question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think we're going to go there again.
So my name is Rachel Pearson. I'm from Columbus State University. being in such a closed, confined space for so long, in close quarters with people, how much of a selective pressure do you think you would be putting on the microorganisms that live on your skin and live in your body? And has there been any investigation into that returning if there is some type of evolution happening in the time that you're in space?
Yeah, that is a great experiment, right? You really want to know, we've all got our microbiome, then we're going in this shared environment, how much of that becomes similar between humans. And so we've done a few time points. We've done some studies where we started to take 2 or 3 time points during the mission. I think what you really want to do is sample this very intensively, particularly at the beginning, right? You want this time course of how the microbiome evolves, and we haven't done that experiment yet. I think you'd like to look at skin microbiome and gut microbiome, and both look at a new introduction of a crew, and then watch that in steady state, and you get this opportunity when you've got 3 people in a Soyuz, and you're overlapping for a few months, so that the time points are actually set up very well. I think the question is collecting the samples and doing the experiment.
Hi, Rebecca Harris with Weill Cornell Medical College. I'm really interested to hear about this issue of microbial contamination that we've already introduced into space and the impact that that's going to have on these environments, and in terms of further research, particularly in preparation for a manned mission to Mars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, and that's something that we think about very carefully at NASA. So we actually have a whole group of folks that's looking at the spacecraft that we're launching in robotic missions or unmanned missions, and ensuring that those spacecraft meet certain cleanliness requirements. Because when we're going and doing these explorations in the solar system, we don't want to be bringing our microbes with us and then announcing that we found life somewhere, right? This would not look good for NASA. So. This is one of the things that keeps me up at night. So we really do, we think about spacecraft cleanliness. In terms of the microbes that we've brought already, it's very contained for the International Space Station. And so I would say probably very likely all of the microbial life is inside the space station. There may be some that's able to survive outside. I'm not sure that that's really been demonstrated at what I would consider definitive level, but we will think about future missions very carefully. So for example, our spacesuits have some leak rate. We actually know that we're probably, in our current spacesuits, we probably are shedding some amount of microbes, so that wouldn't be suitable for a planetary surface exploration mission. My guess is we're gonna actually do a pretty great combination of robotic and human exploration, and we're gonna be thinking about clean rooms and airlocks and having clean sites where maybe you have robotic only interaction with those areas, but it's definitely something we think about all the time for planetary protection.
Thank you.
There is a planetary protection officer, isn't there?
There is, I know. I kind of want that on my business card, right? Planetary protection officer.
Hello, Krista from Bemidji, Minnesota, way up north. Real quick question, of the 100 or so experiments that you had your hands in, what was the most hair-pulling, frustrating one that you actually performed, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, so there was a lot of challenges for the combustion experiments, actually. What that chamber is, as you imagine, I said fire is our #1 worry in a spacecraft, and we're burning things. So we're pretty careful about that combustion chamber. It's actually incredibly hard to where you saw me flipping upside down on the video. It's because you're trying to get, sort of like working under your car in a tight space, you're trying to get access to this. And you have to do it incredibly precisely because this thing needs to seal back up and not have any interaction with the cabin atmosphere. And so that was, do this very carefully, execute it very well, and make sure it's perfect before we start burning things. But it's a very cool experiment to watch on video.
Take one more there and then go.
Hello. Sorry, I have technically only one question, but I'm going to split it in 2 parts. Thank you.
We are actually technically out of time, so it is by my good graces as a moderator.
Okay.
Please, go ahead.
I'm going to try to take it fast. Okay. Are you planning to visit the moon in the future?
Yes, so NASA actually has just laid out an exploration plan. That's our gateway architecture, how we're going to get to Mars. And part of that's involving constructing an architecture in lunar orbit. This is a place that we can go that's starting to push beyond low Earth orbit. We're getting out to the moon. We can build some infrastructure there that actually allows us to do things like test deep space vehicles. You don't just want to go right to Mars. You don't just want to send something off for 2.5 years. You need to make sure it's going to work. So we talk about doing things like a shakedown cruise in the lunar atmosphere.
Basically, we have expertise in, we have expertise in the soil microbes. So I was asking about if you are going to moon, so you're going to put the sample from the moon soil. And
Yes.
we're going to compare it with the soil of Earth and soil of moon. So we can compare the bacteria or something.
So
is it possible?
Right now, any lunar exploration is not talking about going down to the surface. We're talking about being in lunar orbit. I think we're leaving that open potentially, maybe for the international community, or we're thinking about ways that we could do this through partnerships.
Okay.
So we're not talking about lunar sample return right now, but I think we are definitely talking about going past low Earth orbit and building more of an exploration infrastructure. And I think the ideal at some point would be to go get your hands in some Martian soil. You're much more, that's I think the place that we really want to go in terms of sampling. We've got lunar samples back already, and what we really are looking at is Mars these days.
Yeah, all right. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Greg Resch from the University of Lausanne in Switzerland. So we talked a lot about your days. I'm more interested about your nights. No bad idea behind. Okay. So basically, you had a very high load of work, and it's very intense, it seems. So how well do you sleep in space?
Yes,
I think it's a crucial question.
It's a great question, and we actually need to sleep. I mean, you want to spend every waking moment doing an experiment, but we need to sleep because we need to be able to respond to an emergency. We need to be prepared at all times. And so I actually found it pretty easy to sleep in space. You're floating, right? You strap yourself into a sleeping bag so you don't go floating into your equipment or your crewmate or a module you don't want to be in inadvertently. But it's actually, it's very easy to go to sleep in space. And it's required from the human performance element that we actually have to have people really well rested, so that if you do have an emergency, you can respond to it at any time.
Thank you.
I think most of us are going to go to bed tonight dreaming of being up in space, but thank you so much, Kate, for that incredible discussion. That's nice. Come on. Do the thing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
And please enjoy the rest of your evening.